every weekend, here on C-SPAN 2. This book, A G-Man's Journal, is about Oliver Revel's 30-year career in the FBI. He directed or participated in major investigations such as the JFK assassination, the Watergate break-in, and the Iran hostage crisis. Last month, he spoke about the book and his experiences while at a Barnes & Noble bookstore in Washington, D.C. He's introduced by bookstore spokeswoman Jane Graff.
Tonight, we're very pleased to welcome all of you. My name is Jane Graff. Welcome to Barnes & Noble Georgetown, and welcome to all of our C-SPAN viewers across the country. From 1964 to 1994, Buck Revel directed or participated directly in virtually every major FBI investigation, from the JFK assassination, Watergate, the Iran hostage crisis, and Gulf War anti-terrorist operations. As the former Associate Deputy Director in charge of investigations, the Bureau's #2 career post, he sealed his reputation as a legendary maverick in federal law enforcement. Now, in a landmark autobiography, Revel candidly reveals the brilliance and deep-rooted flaws behind 30 years of an FBI investigations. Known early on for his street-smart, proactive, and hard-hitting style inside J. Edgar Hoover's bureau, Revel hunted down mafia hitmen, Ku Klux Klan-type terrorist group, and Eastern Bloc spies. Quickly rising in a system that was often its own worst enemy, he discloses why, after Hoover's death in 1972, he and other reform-minded agents moved to modernize the FBI both tactically and technologically, and how he developed investigative strategies, innovated specific surveillance methods, and innovated and championed special FBI units such as Special Events Management and Hostage Rescue. As skilled as As skilled as advising heads of state as collaring criminals, Revel was summoned to the White House Situation Room. As the senior FBI representative to the National Security Council, he emerged as one of our nation's leading authorities on terrorism and national security issues. He recounts how he persuaded Congress to enact federal laws regarding fugitive apprehension, how he directed all international operations, including tracking the kidnappers and killers of hostages in Beirut, international mafia weapons smuggling, and French and Japanese industrial espionage. He also demonstrates why it is vital for the FBI to become a global nerve center for the world's law enforcement agencies. On the home front, Buck Revel continues to advise the National Security Council, the Pentagon, and Justice Departments on matters of organized crime, drug enforcement, white-collar crime, and terrorism. In his new memoirs, A G-Man's Journal, he proposes drastic reforms for improving the current system in law enforcement and justice, and bluntly analyzes what went wrong at incidents like Branch Davidian tragedy in Waco, World Trade Center bombing, and the Oklahoma City bombing. A riveting chronicle of an extraordinary career amid history-shaping events, A G-Man's Journal lays bare the varied criminal threads facing America today and sets the crime-fighting agenda for the future. Ladies and gentlemen, please give me a warm Barnes & Noble welcome for Oliver Buck Revel.
It's hard hearing all those things that the publisher has written and then try and come up and justify them, particularly with my colleagues that I've worked with sitting here over the years. This book was, of course, a joint effort. Not only my wife and many of my former colleagues, but with a young author that helped me take governmentese and change it into a form of written language that the public would better understand. I had never written a first-person report or a novel or anything of this nature, so writing in the first person in an interesting fashion was one of my first challenges. And Dwight Williams, my co-author, was very, very helpful in that regard. And of course, my wife Sharon made sure that I made everything correct and accurate, and helped my memory, which over the years is not as keen as it once was. I actually wrote this book for several reasons. One, it was not my idea. I was approached by a book producer and convinced to do the project. Secondly, it was to try and bring balance to the historical record of many of the events that I was fortunate enough to be able to participate in, from, as the title says, the Kennedy assassination all the way to the Oklahoma City bombing, such things as Watergate, the Iran-Contra affair, the Pan Am 103 investigation, the world's then largest terrorist investigation, the entire effort against the Klan and the elements that were espousing hate throughout the South and other parts of our nation during the Civil Rights active days. The anti-war movement and those elements of that movement who moved into criminal violations and attempted to essentially bring our government to a halt and in fact engaged in many instances in murder and bombings to carry out their philosophical goals. Those things happened at a time in our society when our country was not sure where it was going or how it wanted to get there. And one agency, in reality, was in the midst of all of this turmoil, and it was the FBI, starting with its legendary and longtime director, J. Edgar Hoover, who, of course, died in 1972, and then trying to come through the transition with Watergate occurring right after he died on into the current events that you're all familiar with that is occurring on our national scene. Just today, an individual was indicted for the Atlanta Olympic Park bombing, a case that has, of course, been going on now for 2.5 years. The Unabomber was finally identified and apprehended. An espionage agent, a former NSA analyst, was indicted yesterday. So the events and activities that the FBI is deeply involved in are very important to our society. And it was my intention to try and bring some balance to what has become the norm, which is to bash federal agents and agencies, to make them responsible for many of the ills of our society, and to blame them for a great deal of the difficulty that we face, whether or not there's any substance to that at all. Now, in this book, I do not excuse the mistakes that have been made, and there have been many. An agency with 25,000 people will make mistakes. It has, and will make some in the future. But I try and point out the exceptional dedication and work that the special agents and other employees of the FBI bring to their country, the contributions they make, and indeed the very significant level of safety and security that they bring to our society. I've had an opportunity to travel all around the world, and I can tell you no other country has an organization like the FBI. Nowhere else can a organization investigate the head of state. Nowhere else can they investigate sitting judges or members of the legislature, as has the FBI, and done so without any political agenda. In spite of the Oliver Stone scenarios that you see coming out of Hollywood today, today's FBI, the 27 or 8,000 people in it, are just as dedicated as those that I joined in 1964 when I entered the agency. So in large part, although this story is based around my career, it is really the story of the FBI as it went through a transition from the years of J. Edgar Hoover, who built the organization and who in his latter years brought it into controversy, to the current FBI, which is expanding its responsibilities on a global basis and is a very important force to see that terrorism, international organized crime, which is spreading and proliferating, drug trafficking, and other internationally linked criminal organizations are thwarted in their efforts to essentially take what was the dichotomy of the Cold War and what President Bush called the New Order and turn it into a world disorder and world anarchy. Because in the 21st century, the first line of defense, in my mind, is going to be federal law enforcement to protect us from the international drug traffickers, from the interlinked organized crime groups, from the terrorist organizations which now have grown up not only with state sponsors, but also now with very strong philosophical bases to where they want to maximize the casualties and punish America for being the opposition, the so-called Great Satan. These are the events that will challenge us in the future. And with weapons of mass destruction looming not on the horizon, but actually available now to groups, organizations, and individuals, it is imperative that we have a line of defense that is effective and yet recognizes that what makes us different is the rule of law. And the constitutional application of that law is the first order of business for the FBI. I was pleased to be able to serve the FBI and my country for 30 years. Before that, for 5 years as a Marine officer. So I wanted to be able to impart some of that experience, the involvement of my family and how much they have given and committed over the years, and the successes that we've had and some of the failures that we've suffered, and the reasons for, and not an explanation, but an attempt to balance the scales so that people will understand that human beings do make mistakes, but on the whole, and given the circumstances they face, the FBI is a very, very remarkable organization. I think that I look back on my career, and people say, well, what was your most important case? What was the case that brought you the greatest satisfaction? And I can't really identify that case because so many did bring that level of satisfaction, whether it was returning a child to its parents, which I had an opportunity to do on some occasions, whether it was apprehending a mafia hitman who had killed dozens of people, whether it was tracking down spies who jeopardized our national security, or whether it was bringing in drug traffickers. My last arrest in Dallas, Texas, before I retired, was of a Mexican drug trafficker whose organization had killed more than a dozen people. His bodyguard was personally responsible for killing 18 people, and he was preying upon the young people in Dallas, bringing drugs in from Mexico and getting them hooked so that they could continue to develop their drug trafficking organization. Those kind of accomplishments are not individual, they're of the organization and the people that support it, like the U.S. attorneys, but they still give you a great deal of satisfaction because you know that if you're not there, then a difference would not have been made, and they do, the agents and employees of the FBI do indeed make a difference. I think that on balance, I'll be very satisfied if this book at least starts a dialogue among some as to the importance of federal law enforcement, the need to redirect and restructure and reorganize federal law enforcement to deal with the threats of the 21st century, and it recognizes the deep professional commitment of the career employees of the FBI and the other federal agencies and gives them the appropriate tools to carry out their duties and functions. That, of course, is the hope and goal of this book. So with that, I'd like to, at this time, respond to questions, and hopefully things I haven't covered, I'll be able to answer for you. Thank you.
What do you think the FBI's principal area of focus is right now as far as law enforcement, and should that be changed to something else?
Well, the FBI cannot have a principal focus because it has so many responsibilities across the entire spectrum of federal law enforcement, but it can have areas of emphasis. And we saw that today with the indictment of Rudolph for the Atlanta Olympic bombing. Certainly terrorism is an area of significant responsibility. The investigations ongoing in East Africa with the Osama bin Laden organization is an area of principal FBI responsibility. So both domestic and foreign or international terrorism have to be areas of very specific interest and effort on the part of the FBI. Of course, the FBI is the principal counterintelligence agency of the United States. So just because the Cold War is over does not mean that we do not have enemies, both state and individual, who would take advantage of our technology, take advantage of our national security information, and turn it against our best interest. So espionage and counterintelligence will continue to be a very important responsibility. I believe the FBI and the DEA must do a better job in strategizing on a global basis the entire drug effort. The FBI knew when we entered drug enforcement in 1982 we could not solve the drug problem. What we knew was that we had to be a holding action until our society could come to grips with this terrible plague that's been laid upon us. Education and treatment have to be part of the process, but we also must have federal agencies that work in a coordinated fashion to ensure that we can prevent the drugs from entering the United States and deal with the major organizations who are trafficking drugs to our children and essentially destroying our next generation. That must be an effort. And of course, the bottom line responsibility has to always be to deal with corruption, particularly corruption in government. The FBI has a very unique and important responsibility to deal with corruption at every level of government, whether it be a local judge, a county commissioner, or a federal, a United States senator, or a federal judge. All of those things have happened in the past, and I'm certain they'll happen in the future. But you must have an agency totally free from partisan involvement or political activity in order to do that. I think those are the continuing challenges that the FBI faces. Yes, sir.
Former Klansman Tommy Terrence, who later turned against the Klan, has said that without the FBI there might have been up to 10 times as much violence during the civil rights period against civil rights workers. One, do you agree with that? And two, whatever pluses and minuses of what was done, what do you think you learned from the experience of fighting the Klan in the 60s?
Oh, the question is about the FBI and its involvement with the investigation of the Klan in the 60s and 70s. What do I think about it, and could it have been done better, and did the FBI make a difference? Well, the answer is absolutely it did make a difference. Many agents were sent into the South, and those that were already there, and worked tirelessly on not only specific cases but developing intelligence, which was then shared through agencies they could trust to carry out preventive operations. There would have been many more civil rights workers killed. There would have been much more intimidation than did occur, which was, of course, entirely too much. That has been largely an untold story, and the dichotomy between J. Edgar Hoover and Martin Luther King has sort of become, well, the FBI wasn't really committed to the civil rights movement and its protection under the law. That's not true at all. There was a dichotomy between Dr. King and J. Edgar Hoover, but that did not affect the FBI's commitment. And if you'll look back, some of the cases it investigated are still being brought to trial with evidence they developed, literally, 3 decades later. I hate to think where the South would have been, and I'm from the South. I hate to think where it would have been if it had not been for the dedicated agents of the FBI and the Justice Department Civil Rights Division, which put themselves on the line to protect as best they could under very limited federal jurisdiction at the time, the civil rights workers and the civil rights organizations that were doing such important work in the South at that time. Yes, sir.
Can you explain the 900 or so FBI files in the White House?
Question is, how do I explain the 900 files at the White House? I cannot. That particular part of the FBI's responsibility never came under my authority. That was in what used to be called records management. But we had a very rigorous standard about sending summary reports to the White House. They had to be requested by the White House counsel. It had to be on an individual we knew was under investigation for clearance for a White House job or a high-level appointment, and they were very closely tracked and carefully monitored. It, of course, is absolutely unacceptable for FBI files or reports to be used for any sort of partisan political purposes or to gain advantage over one's political adversaries. And that's one thing of significant interest I'll be watching in Ken Starr's reports as to what the bottom line is on that particular situation. Yes, sir.
Sir, regarding domestic terrorism and weapons of mass destruction, what do you think the probabilities we'll see an attack in the early part of the 21st century, and what type of target do you think it'd be against?
The question is, weapons of mass destruction, what is the probability of attack and what kind of target? Well, I have to say that I believe that the conventional weapons of terrorists will continue to be the most prevalent. Bombs have been very effective for terrorists, and they are very easy to make and very easy to deploy. But if you really want to make a statement, if you want to traumatize a society, look at what the Aum Shinrikyo did with sarin gas in Tokyo. That cat's out of the bag. There are now available on the international market gas and biological materials as well as some radiological materials that can be utilized and in fact someday will be utilized and probably not in the too distant future. And they'll pick a target that is not defended. They'll pick an easy target because they are not concerned with military advantage. They're concerned with traumatizing a society, punishing a society. So they will choose something like the World Trade Center. No value from a standpoint of strategic, but at 50,000 people in a very confined area with worldwide attention. That must be dealt with. The President's Commission on Infrastructure Protection has started that process. The FBI has the lead role domestically, is putting resources into that area. But the consequences of a terrorist attack with a weapon of mass destruction, whether it be chemical, biological, or radiological, is just too horrific to consider. And we must be prepared, and the preparation must be for prevention rather than reaction to. In the past, we really could afford to react. We might lose 100, 150 people, which is a terrible tragedy, but what if the World Trade Center had been 50,000 people? And what if they had contaminated the area with a biological or a chemical, or as they hope to do, a radiological material? This society would still be reeling. I mean, look at the consequences of the Oklahoma City bombing and how it traumatized our society for so long, and rightfully so. Well, can you imagine if that had been 50,000, 100,000, 250,000 people? Then I'm afraid we'd have draconian laws, and we'd have whole groups of people being incarcerated detention-wise, as we had during World War II. That we cannot afford as a society of law. Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell me what triggers the FBI to get involved in an investigation?
On a domestic group?
Yeah.
It's what's called a criminal predicate. On a domestic organization or group, the FBI must have credible information that a crime has been or is being committed or is in the planning conspiracy stage in order to initiate an investigation. That's carried out under the Attorney General's domestic guidelines. In addition, the privacy law prevents the FBI from collecting information, even public information, about any organization, group, or individual that is not under investigation. So where anybody in this room can collect information about militias and white hate groups and any other type of organization that is openly espousing violence, the FBI cannot. It must have a criminal predicate in order to collect even public information. And that, of course, puts it at a great disadvantage. I point out in the book that at the time of the Oklahoma City bombing, the FBI had one case on one militia organization in Michigan. And in spite of Mr. Panetta, Leon Panetta, the President's Chief of Staff, telling everybody on Sunday morning television that the FBI knew all about these groups and that it was well in hand, I came on right behind him and said, I'm sorry, that's not so. The FBI does not know about these groups. I, as a then private citizen, knew much more about the militias than the active FBI knew at the time of the Oklahoma City bombing. Now, of course, some of that has changed as a result of the bombing and the spin-off investigations from that, as was true of the World Trade Center bombing as well. But the FBI does not have legal authority to simply initiate an investigation without a basis to believe that a criminal act has been or is being committed. Yes, sir.
I have two questions for you. The first one is, how did you get your nickname Buck? And the second one is, could you explain the relationship between the FBI, CIA, NSA, and DIA?
That's a real, okay. Well, the first one I can handle. I'm not sure I can handle the second. My nickname actually came from my grandfather, Buck Raines, who was a native of the Indian Territory of Oklahoma, part Cherokee, and when I was a youngster growing up, I needed a nickname, and I couldn't think of a better one to adopt than my granddad's. And when your real name is Oliver Bergen Revell III, you've got to have a nickname. And the second part, the differences between the CIA, the DIA, the FBI, and what was the other one? NSA. All right. Well, the DIA and NSA are part of the Department of Defense. The NSA is for signals intelligence, and that is its only responsibility. It collects signals intelligence for the national security of the United States. It shares that with the FBI and CIA on a specific as-needed basis, and with the CIA on a continuing basis. But it is a military organization for signals intelligence. The DIA is an umbrella organization for the collection of intelligence for specific military purposes. Both its analysis and its collection are geared towards the military needs of the United States, whereas the CIA is an umbrella organization for all other intelligence activities, including bringing in the military intelligence components. The CIA's relationship with the FBI, in spite of what you read, is a very positive one. I think certainly the bombings in East Africa, obviously the intelligence that came from that was not FBI intelligence, that was CIA-based and DIA-based intelligence, and it was integrated quite quickly into the FBI's investigation. The FBI, on the other hand, is an agency of the Justice Department and is the principal investigative and counterintelligence agency of the United States government. It does not work for the CIA or under the umbrella of the CIA, but it works together with the CIA and is part of the intelligence community. The CIA director wears two hats. He's the director of the CIA and the director of the U.S. intelligence community. There he has a coordination and budget authorization role, and the FBI, of course, its counterintelligence and counterterrorism budgets pass through that process. So there is a very closely related coordination between these organizations, but their functions and their activities are very different. Yes, sir.
What are the largest challenges facing the FBI going into the next century, both internally and externally?
I think one of the largest challenges, and this sounds parochial and I don't mean it to be, is we now have 144 separate federal agencies going out in different directions without any coordination, without any direction or control, and no one's in charge. No one's in charge. As we go into the 21st century and we're faced with the globalization of very, very specific criminal activity, including state-sponsored crime, not just state-sponsored terrorism, but there are now nations which are kleptocracies. The governments themselves are the criminal enterprises. As we face that in the 21st century, we can't afford to have 144 separate and competing federal agencies. We cannot have 144 agencies enforcing over 4,400 federal laws. Today there's a great debate going on about passing a federal hate crimes law. Well, I'm not against hate crimes, but the most specific crime to deal with a hate crime is the capital crime of the state. The state of Wyoming has already said they're going to indict these young men for capital murder. Well, the federal government doesn't need to come in behind that, but it's just another encroachment on the federal government, if it does, of states' primary responsibility to enforce the laws that apply to the citizens of that state. The federal government, the national government, should deal with the national issues, international issues, and the protection of our borders. And that's where we should be really concentrated. So I think the challenge to the FBI is to try to move forward in a consolidation effort with other federal agencies to bring them in. I think there should be a Department of Federal Law Enforcement rather than these 144 separate agencies. And these groups, these agencies should be brought together in groupings and then ultimately brought together on functional responsibilities. We can't afford, as we go forward into a new millennia, to have the disparate and confused enforcement picture we have in the United States. The FBI cannot lead this, but it can be an active participant and, I think, a catalyst for this operation. Yes, sir.
Good evening, Bud.
Thank you.
Something came to mind when you were answering an earlier question. Recently, a man named Irwin Sewell died. For more than 25 years, Mr. Sewell ran a little-known organization inside the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith. And I'm wondering whether you ever interacted with him or his organization.
Yes, in fact, I was asked that question, as Steve Pomerantz recalls, when I was testifying on a group of that was called CISPAs, and the FBI was receiving a great deal of criticism. And I was in a debate with Senator Specter about the issue of, well, Senator, if we have to wait until a crime's been committed, then we're going to have an awful lot of blood on the street. And Senator Specter's response, well, in a free society, that may be the price we pay. Well, can we pay that price if the casualties are going to be 250 to 500,000 people? And I think clearly we must find a balance. And we have worked in the Bureau with B'nai B'rith, with the Southern Poverty Law Center, and those who could collect information that the FBI was prohibited from collecting. If it had not been for B'nai B'rith and their investigation of white hate groups, Klan groups, and so forth, the FBI and the ATF would have been much further behind than they were when it became time to investigate on specific criminal basis.
Did you ever meet with Sewell personally?
I think I met with him at a conference one time, but I didn't have a personal relationship.
They must have had some real understanding about the limitations that the Bureau had in terms of the collection of intelligence-related information domestically.
Yes, they were accused at some times of being a surrogate for the FBI, which they were never a surrogate. They would come to us, and still do, to the best of my knowledge, whenever they had specific information about groups or individuals committing specific crimes. And that's very important for all citizens and various groups to be able to do and to feel comfortable in doing.
Apparently, from time to time, they help the Bureau get up to speed in areas where otherwise you would have had to start fresh.
Absolutely. That's true. And their reports were credible, and they were not the only source that the Bureau took information from, but they were a credible source of information in an area that the Bureau could not operate, based on the current guidelines. Sir. Yes, sir.
How does the FBI interrelate with state police agencies? Let's say if there's a case where the state police are already involved, how does the FBI get involved, or what kinds of conditions do they get involved in a case?
The question is, how does the FBI relate to state agencies? I presume you mean state and local agencies, when they're already involved in a case, and what would trigger FBI involvement? It would come about through one of two ways. One, we would get requests for assistance from the state or local agency, which happens all the time, or it would be a concurrent crime in which a federal violation had also been committed, and then the FBI would be working the case in conjunction with the state or local agencies. There's not an FBI office today that doesn't have multiple task forces with state and local agencies on virtually everything: violent crime, terrorism, fugitives, drug task forces, and so forth. We have 17,000 police agencies in the United States and 144 federal agencies. Task forces are the only way we can do it. It's simply the way that the job must be done. Now, certainly that's not the most effective way to do it, but it is the most effective way that we can do it under the current structure and arrangement. And so task forces and cooperation with state and local agencies is a very important part of the responsibility of the FBI. Well, I think that just about answers all the questions, does it not? Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to put Mr. Revell up here at the table to sign your copies of your books. Please bring them on up, come on up, and he'll sign your stock for you.
Yes, sir. For you, it's good.
Huh? Okay, well, just a minute. Huh?
You dealt with it very effectively.
Yeah, I know. He probably had to catch an early train.
Yeah. And he's gone all the time. Well, next time you come up, let's go to lunch or whatever, breakfast, whatever you have time.
I will. I still got to get me together those Secret Service guys.
Yeah. You're great, Buck. I'm glad you finished this.
Yeah, I am too.
Great.
I'm glad to get it over
Good
with.
to see you, my friend.
Good to see you, Bill. Appreciate you coming by.
All right. I look forward.
All righty.
Okay. One for me, and I would like to do one for Jennifer and Mac. Sell all your books here at once.
Has Jeff left? Jeff came and did. He left.
I don't think so.
She had no serious reason to feel lonely or depressed, really. She was not that far away from her sisters.
Hi there, Reggie. How you doing, buddy?
Thanks a lot. By the way, those comments were terrific. Man, right on the money. Let's get a copy of that recording.
And
I mean, those are really great comments.
Who's this to?
This goes to Mac, M-A-C, my son. He's a former Marine, and
So you're going to end up with a real case of writer's cramp.
and then one for Jennifer, Jennifer, my daughter. I should have opened those up for you. Jennifer. about joining the Bureau, as you know.
Good, yes.
And this is for Sid. He's one of our contributors, a guy in California, or in Colorado. SID.
SID.
Sid Dines, but just Sid is fine.
They would refuse to get involved unless they had some.
Oliver Revell currently runs a security consulting business in Dallas. His book, A G-Man's Journal, is published by Pocket Books, a division of Simon & Schuster. You can learn more about it from their website at www.simonsays.com. The co-author of this book, Dwight Williams, has also written From the Garden of Memory and co-written Raising Lazarus.